I want to explain to you how to choose a web hosting service. Choosing a web hosting service is kind of important because it's not just about your website, it has other implications. So, in today's conversation, I want to give you a step by step. So, here's an overview I want you to first to pay attention to. So, let's first talk about what is included with a web hosting service. So, you have all kinds of services. Or when you have a web hosting platform, you have all kinds of services in terms of data transfers, storage, email, and other features. And even how you pay month to month versus annual payments can be radically different. And it really depends upon the platform. So you need to know exactly what kind of strategy, what kind of tactics you want to have when it comes to choosing the right platform for you. You should also familiarize yourself with the many web hosting tiers that are available. You have VPS, so virtual private server. You have dedicated hosting, you have a WordPress hosting, and in some cases you have cloud hosting. So it's one of those things again where you have to really familiarize yourself with what's out there and what you want for your particular project or your business. Okay, so basically the thing here is that let's first talk about shared web hosting. So you need to have a clear idea what I'm talking about. Shared web hosting is a web hosting process in which the provider houses multiple sites on a single server. So you have a single server. Let me give you an example. Site A, your site shares the same server with site B. Let's say John Doe's sites, site C, site D, site E. So the upside is that the multiple sites that you have here, they share the server cost. So shared web hosting is generally very inexpensive. It's very cheap web hosting. If you think about it, you can have an option for less than $10 per month. Think about that. So you also have VPS web hosting. So VPS hosting is similar to shared hosting in that multiple sites share the same server, but the similarities end there. In housing terms, let me give you a housing metaphor here. VPS hosting is like renting your own apartment in a larger building, so you're much more isolated than the roommate situation that I just mentioned earlier. But it is still possible that a neighboring apartment could cause annoyance for you, but far less likely. So in web hosting terms, site A's traffic surge will not have a nearly as much impact on site B or site C. And as you can expect, VPS hosting costs more than shared hosting. Expect to pay like roughly $20 to $60 per month, depending on the service. By the way, boss, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Make yourself comfortable. You are going to enjoy today's conversation. I want to talk to you about a third type of web hosting service that we call the web. It's a dedicated web hosting, and so dedicated web hosting is both powerful and pricey. It's actually reserved for sites that require an incredible amount of server resources. So unlike shared or VPS hosting, dedicated hosting makes your website be actually the lone tenant on a server. So when you really think about it, it means that your website taps the server's full power and pays for the privilege. Okay, so if you're looking for a high-powered site, let's say an online mansion for your business, dedicated hosting is the way to go. That said, many dedicated web hosting services tasks you with handling backend technical issues. So this is kind of important to really think about. So you got to have a certain operational backbone in your project or your company to sort of handle that. And on the topic of dedicated hosting, many web hosting services also offer managed hosting. So this type of hosting sees the web host act as your IT department, handling the server's maintenance and upkeep. This hosting option is something that you would typically find with dedicated servers. So it's a business-centric addition. So again, it's one of those things where you got to have the budget for it. So a lot of planning goes into effect. So when you are ready, you have to really be really strategic here. And so that's for dedicated hosting. You also have a fourth type of hosting. So you have shared, VPS, dedicated, and now I want to talk to you about WordPress web hosting. So WordPress hosting is for people who want to build their sites on the back of the popular WordPress content management system. And so that CMS is from WordPress.org. And the cool thing is that there are actually multiple ways to set up shop using this free open source blogging and site building platform. and you gain actually the most web building functionality if you create a self-hosted site. That's really cool, right? But this means that you got to have the technical, you have to have the technical knowledge here. And so this typically involves transferring the free WordPress CMS to the server or signing up for a web host to optimize the WordPress plan. And so when you have an optimized plan, the host automatically handles the backend stuff for you. So you don't have to worry about, let's say, updating the plugins and CMS and even enabling automatic backups. So you really are taken care of. So in this instances, the WordPress environment typically comes pre-installed on the server. And the cool thing is you can also host your website on WordPress.com, but that's different from the kind of hosting mentioned earlier. WordPress.com uses the same code from WordPress.org, but really it hides the server code and handles it will handle the hosting for you. In that sense, it resembles entries in when it comes to entries in our review about the online site builders. So this is kind of cool. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about how to choose a web hosting service. Let me give you a winner here. So when we talk about web hosting service, there are some features you got to really pay attention to, and those features are going to come and enhance your backend, your I would say your hosting backend. So when it's time to set up shop, look for a web host that offers several kinds of servers. Okay, shared web hosting, VPS web hosting, dedicated web hosting, or WordPress web hosting. And also think about advanced cloud server platforms such as Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud. And those custom server builds should really help you out. But most importantly, pay attention also to 24/7 customer support. Because the last thing you want is to actually have a problem and you just be on the phone and nobody's picking up, right? So depending on your focus, you may need a web host that can handle page views or visitors that rank in the high thousands or millions. Again, depending on the projects you are looking at. And many busy hosting plans offer an onboard specialist who can help keep you get started too in terms of functionality, in terms of technicality. So if you are planning on selling a product, look for a web host that offers a secure sockets layer, right? We're speaking about SSL certificate because it really encrypts the data between the customer's browser and web host to safeguard purchasing information, and you need that. And you're probably familiar right now with SSL because this is actually the green padlock that appears in your web browser's address bar as you visit an online financial institution or retail outlet. So you kind of have that. And a few companies toss in an SSL certificate free of charge. Others may charge you roughly $100 per year for that extra security layer. So it's one of those things where you have to really see whether or not security is kind of important for your project. I mean, in any project, based on our experience, SSL always adds an extra layer of assurance. And let me give you also some extra web hosting info. So if you're not sure of the type of hosting your business needs, you might want to start small with, let's say, shared web hosting. And the cool thing is you can always graduate to a more robust, feature-rich package of, say, VPS hosting or even dedicated hosting in the future, right? Now, unfortunately, some hosts don't offer all hosting types. So consider how much you expect to grow your website and how soon before you commit to anything longer than a one-year plan. It's also worth spending the time upfront to make sure that the host you select is able to provide the growth you envision for your site, because switching web hosting providers midstream is not a trivial undertaking. And so you want to make sure that, see, this is what I'm talking about, scalability. Scalability is kind of important in the long run. So once you decide your price range, you need to consider how long you'll need web hosting for. If this is a short-term project, say less than a month or two, you can typically receive a refund should you cancel your hosting within 60 days. Some companies offer 30-day money-back guarantees. Others offer 90-day money-back guarantees. Once again, it's actually beneficial to do your homework beforehand. Let me give you a few pro tips here. As we're talking about web hosting service, it's important to really understand that there are a couple of things you need to pay attention to before you sign up for an account. Remember, normally you want to make sure that you are with the same provider for a long time, so you have a clear idea what the provider is doing. And it's important to really understand that there is a big difference between hosting types. Okay, I want to give you a few pro tips because it's one of those things where, because you are signing a multi-year contract, you want to have a clear idea what you're getting yourself into. And there is a big difference between hosting types. And so when you go with, let's say you go with shared hosting versus VPS hosting or dedicated hosting or cloud hosting, WordPress hosting, in some cases you have reseller hosting. And reseller hosting lets you start your own branded web hosting business without worrying about building the infrastructure from scratch. So WordPress hosting lets you build a site in an environment that caters to the world's most popular CMS. And cloud hosting, that's an entirely different beast that lets you easily scale website power across multiple servers, though not every web host offers it yet. And the pricing for this hosting tiers are all over the place, so shopping around is really vital. At the end of the day, to really make the right choice for you, think about what really matters to you. Okay, there's a big difference to know about web hosting providers, but you also want to make sure that the customer service at the back end. See, the back end of things are kind of important because you do not want to go with, let's say you want to go with a hosting provider and he's not, or he or she, or I mean, the company I'm talking about here is not really able to provide the type of resources you need when it comes to customer service. And remember that bandwidth is not the same as data transfer. So bandwidth and data transfer are frequently used, they're used interchangeably to define the amount of data that your website serves to visitors, but the terms technically do not have the same definitions. Let me break it down for you. Bandwidth represents the total amount of data that can be transferred at one time, while data transfer is the throughput or the actual amount of information that can be used over a given period of time. And this is typically a month, 45 days, in some cases, 60 days. So think of it like this. A web host may have a maximum 5 gigabyte bandwidth, but depending on your hosting plan, your site may only allow 1 gigabyte of data transfers per month. It depends on how your site is set up. So if your website exceeds its allotted monthly data transfers due to, let's say, a Reddit hit, for instance, a web host may slow your site's data transfer speeds or charge you a fee as a penalty. It may even prompt you to upgrade to a higher web hosting tiers. So it's good to know your site's data limitations before you run into situations like this. Plus, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about web hosting service. How do you choose one? One thing I also want to tell you that when people talk about web hosting service and they're telling you unlimited, it's not really quite unlimited because web hosts will entice you to sign up for their web hosting plans by tempting you with a promise of unlimited storage or, let's say, monthly data transfers. The question is it really true? No, it's generally not a completely honest deal. I mean, it's one of those things where you want to read the fine prints. Okay, unlimited storage and data transfers are typically associated with shared or WordPress plans, but they let you really run wild within limits. Let's say if your blog gets a steady stream of reasonable traffic, whatever that means, you will be in good standing. However, you should not expect to upload or stream 50 terabytes of data per day. The average Joe is likely dabbling in some questionable activities like data usage that high, and the company will likely flag you for it. Okay, and so this is kind of important. You want to read a lot more. There are terms of services to have a clear idea what they really mean. And the hard disk drive, solid state drive trade-off. So if you're looking to sign up for a shared web hosting service, you'll likely receive a real estate on traditional hard disk drive HDD server. The advantage of an HDD server based is that it can really offer large storage amounts on the cheap. And this is one of those things where if you are on the budgetary, like if you are restricted, budgetarily speaking, you want to go for it. So as you move up the hosting ladder to more, let's say, powerful offerings such as VPS and dedicated, web host will give you the option to build a site on a solid state drive. So you have SSD. And SSD-based servers are lightning fast storage units, and SSD technology is still pretty pricey. So your SSD-based servers typically carry much smaller storage totals than than HDD. So, and the thing is that when you analyze things a little deeply, you will rarely see 1 terabyte SSD servers, which is really a number that's commonplace in the HDD arena. So this is kind of important. And a Linux server will do most of the time. So nearly every web host offers Linux as the operating system that powers their servers. In fact, it's one of those things where you have to really understand that it's more commonplace now than ever. And so that said, if your site needs the ASP or ASP.NET scripting frameworks, you will need to run it with the Windows Server operating system. That's because the script you write and web pages you produce will only function in a Windows-based environment. So this is kind of important to know. Let me give you the decision you need to really pay attention to here. So at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself one question, and only one. What web hosting features do you really need for your projects, for your business, for your blog, for your websites, for your e-commerce projects? You got to really think, okay? So many web hosts offer limited features in their starter packages and then expand the offerings, sometimes tremendously for higher tier plans. So you want to read the small print to make sure the plan you are actually selecting offers what you need. So if you need a site builder application to design your website, make sure that the low-cost web host you are picking usually comes with a site builder. Many of them require you to pay for the builder as a separate add-on. And website builders usually don't cost a lot of money. But if you can find a web host that includes one for free, that's money in your pocket anyway, right? And if it's integrated, if it's really integrated with your hosting service, you are more likely to have a smooth, supported experience. And that's what you need anyway, right? You want to have that kind of smooth experience, operationally speaking. You also want to have a web host with 24/7 customer support, if not by phone, then at least by chat. Forums, knowledge bases, and help tickets are all well and good, but sometimes you just need to communicate with another human to get things ironed out as quickly as possible, right? I mean, you do not want to really just spend your time just doing some DIY fixing here. No. And one thing I want to say is that not all 24/7 customer support terms are equal. Companies like GoDaddy and Liquid Web boast incredibly knowledgeable and helpful customer support squads. And the fact that, it's one of those things where you have to go through, and we actually confirmed that by actually going through their services. And when it comes to server operating systems, Linux remains typically the default option. Still, some services, they offer a choice of Linux or Windows server hosting, as I said earlier. So if you have very specific server-side applications that require Windows, such as SQL Server, or let's say a custom application written in .NET, then you need to make sure your web host has Windows hosting. But don't let the idea of a Linux host intimidate you. Nowadays, most web hosts offer a graphical interface or a control panel to simplify server administration and website management. So instead of just tapping at the command line, you will click easily identifiable icons. And Windows hosting is often more expensive than Linux hosting, especially in the dedicated server area. That's not always the case, but it's something you should be aware of as you shop around. Let me give you a bonus here. So we have talked about shared hosting, VPS hosting, dedicated hosting, WordPress hosting. What about email hosting? Let's talk about that. And basically here, if you aim to have a web presence, you must have email, that's for sure. It is actually a convenient way for potential customers and clients to send you a message, Word document, or other file, right? Other files. Thankfully, most web hosts include email in their hosting plans. Some web hosts actually offer unlimited email account creation, which is really great when it comes to scalability, right? Which is really great for future growth. While others, where we have seen it, others will offer a finite amount. So you got to think about either you want a limited email account or a finite amount. And you naturally should want unlimited email, because even if you have, no matter the project you're working on, you want to have this sort of limitless email possibility. And that said, not all web hosts offer email. WP Engine, for example, does not. In such instances, you must sign up for email accounts from a company other than your web host. And this is kind of important. And so it's one of those things where you have to think about what really works for you. you got to also think about web hosting uptime. So the all the features that I just spoke to you about, those features are valuable for the web hosting experience, but none match the importance of site uptime. If your site is down, clients or customers will be unable to fund you or access your products or services for that matter. Okay, so you have to really pay attention to what really qualifies the web hosting, especially the web hosting uptime. And so you also have to think about e-commerce and marketing. So when you think about e-commerce and marketing, this is, of course, if you are having an e-commerce project down the road. Let's say you want to have an online store or something of that nature. So you got to really think about that in your strategy from the get-go. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. In today's conversation, I explained to you how to choose a web hosting service. And let me do a quick recap here. So I gave you the overview, the winner, the pro tips, the decision, and the bonus. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.